September 2nd, 1939. 4 o'clock in the morning. Over the German. By industrial town of Olau, a small, slow, outdated aircraft descends through the darkness. Inside the cockpit, Polish pilot Janusz Maciejowski squints at the shadows below. His engines strain. His fuselage is thin aluminum, barely armed, barely defended. One burst of machine gun fire from a German fighter would shred it like paper. But Maciejowski doesn't hesitate. He's here because his nation has no choice, and neither does he. In the next few seconds, he will do something no other Allied pilot has done. He will drop the first bomb on German soil. This is the story of the PZL.23 Karaś, the Blau, forgotten Polish plane that bombed Germany first. Before we go back to that moment, you need to understand something about Poland in 1939. Poland was born on November 11th, 1918. That's it. Poland had been erased from the map for 123 years, carved up between Russia, Austria, and Prussia. When the dust of World War I settled, Poland was restored. A new nation, suddenly surrounded by two enemies, Nazi Germany to the sea, West and Soviet Russia to the east, both hungry, both watching. Through the 1920s and 30s, Poland knew invasion was coming. It was not a question of if, but when, and they had almost no time to prepare. In 1931, the Polish Air Force looked at what it had and knew it was obsolete. Biplanes, canvas, and wood, designed in the previous century, literally, fighter planes that couldn't keep up with what the Germans were building. So the Polish government asked the State Aviation Works Państwowe Zakłady Lotnicze, or PZL, to design a new light bomber and reconnaissance aircraft, something that could carry a bomb load, something that could operate from rough airfields, something that could at least survive long enough to get home. The designer was a man named Stanisław Preuss. He worked in Warsaw at the PZL factories, and by 1934, the first prototype was ready. It flew on April 1st, 1934. The first production version, the PZL.23 entered service in 1936. Then came the better version, the .23B, with more powerful engines, Bristol Pegasus engines, built under license in Poland. Slow, underpowered by modern standards. Booty was what Poland had. By September 1939, when the Germans invaded, Poland had exactly 250 aircraft of this type ready to fly. 250 Karaś bombers against the entire German Air Force. The military leadership didn't expect them to win. Nobody expected them to win. What they expected was that the aircraft would at least fly sorties, at least strike back, at least show that Poland would not go quietly. The Karaś was assigned to 5 bomber squadrons and 7 reconnaissance squadrons. Each squadron had about an aircraft. Not many, but something. September 1st, 1939. 4:45 in the morning. The battleship Schleswig-Holstein opens fire on a Polish garrison at Westerplatte. This is how the Second World War begins in Europe. The official beginning. The moment they write in the history books. But this is not the first shot of the war. Not even close. At the same moment, German aircraft are already in the Polish sky. Stukas diving on airfields. Bf-109s strafing hangars. Quote, the German plan is to destroy the Polish Air Force before it can even take off. It's a strategy that will repeat in every country Hitler invades. Wipe out the Air Force on the ground, own the skies, then send the tanks and infantry. But Poland's pilots are ready. 19 minutes earlier, at 4:26 in the morning on September 1st, a Polish observation post spotted German aircraft. Immediately, the alarm went out. Pilots scrambled. Ground crews ran to the hangars. At the airbase near Lodz, where the 21st Squadron was based, mechanics were already firing up the engines of the Karaś bombers. The 21st Squadron had its orders: find the German formations, intercept them, bomb them before they could bomb Polish airfields. It was a desperate plan. Outnumbered, outgunned, in slow aircraft, Buty was all they had. 5 Karaś bombers took off from Lodz at dawn. Just 5. They flew west toward German territory, into the rising sun, searching for targets. Below them, the Oder River marked the sun border between Poland and Germany. They crossed it. They were now over enemy territory. The lead pilot was Janusz Maciejowski. He was 23 years old, born in Russian Poland, trained in the new Polish Air Force, an experienced pilot by the standards of the tense time. The 5 aircraft climbed higher, searching 20 minutes over German soil. 30 minutes. They had to find something. Then, at 6:20 in the morning, September 2nd, 1939, they saw it. The industrial town of Ochlau. A factory complex. An important one. Maciejowski didn't hesitate. He had his target. 5 aircraft in close formation. Slow, vulnerable. No fighters to protect them. No anti-aircraft guns to suppress the ground defenses. Just speed, which they didn't have. Maciejowski pushed the nose of his Karaś down and began the bombing run. At 500 meters, his bombardier was ready. The bomb load, 100-kilogram bombs, conventional, not heavy, was hanging under the wings and fuselage. At 300 meters, the pilot and bombardier were looking directly into the face of German flak. Guns on the ground opening fire. Tracer rounds arcing up. The moment felt eternal. The bombs fell. One direct hit on the factory complex. Then another, and another. The 5 aircraft wheeled away, diving low, heading back toward the border. Behind them, smoke rose from Ochlau. Fire. The industrial plant was hit, damaged. Later, the Germans would assess the damage and estimate the loss. It wasn't catastrophic. The factories would rebuild. The production would continue. Buty was real. It was the first. Maciejowski flew back to Lodz, landed his aircraft, and said nothing about what he had accomplished. The other pilots landed. All 5 aircraft returned intact. This was the real miracle, that they got away with it. 3 hours later, the Eastern European news services reported what had happened. The Associated Press picked it up. A Polish bomber had struck German territory. The first Allied bombing of the war. It wasn't in a history book. It was on the radio. It was news. 4. One day, the whole world knew that Poland had struck back. But then the invasion consumed everything. September 3rd, the British and French declared war on Germany. September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded Poland from the east. Poland was trapped. The Karaś bombers flew mission after mission. Attacks on German columns, raids on air bases, reconnaissance flights. They flew until they ran out of fuel. They flew until they ran out of pilots. They flew until there was nowhere left to fly. By the end of the Polish campaign, 6 weeks later, 67 Karaś bombers had been shot down in combat. Another 60 were destroyed on the ground or abandoned. Some crashed in accidents. Some simply ran out of gas and crashed in fields or forests. Poland was divided between Germany and the Soviet Union. Warsaw fell. The government fled. The campaign was over. But the story wasn't finished. About 20 Karaś aircraft, flown by Polish pilots retreating south through Romania, managed to escape. The Romanian government was officially neutral but sympathetic to Poland. They allowed the aircraft to land. The Romanians, seeing an opportunity, decided to keep 19 of the aircraft. They wanted bombers. They wanted aircraft that could fly. So 19 Karaś bombers joined the Romanian Air Force. For the next 2 years, those 19 aircraft flew against the Soviet Union. After Operation Barbarossa began in 1941, Romania was at war with the Soviets. Those Polish bombers, under Romanian command, dropped bombs on Soviet targets. They flew ground attack missions. They were no longer Polish aircraft technically, but they were still flown by Polish pilots who managed to stay with them. They continued the war that had been stolen from Poland. One of those Romanian-based Karaś bombers was shot down over the Black Sea. Others were lost in combat. By 1943, most of them were gone, worn out, or destroyed. The few that survived were relegated to training duties, then scrapped. The Karaś was designed as a light bomber. It weighed about 2,300 kilograms. The engines produced about 720 horsepower, its maximum. Speed was about 350 kilometers per hour. This was not fast. German fighters could do 420 kilometers per hour, sometimes more. German fighters were armed with machine guns and cannons. The Karaś had only 3 machine guns, and 2 of them were manually operated by hand from open positions in the cond. Fuselage. Flying a Karaś in 1939 was like flying into the future with weapons from the past. The pilots who flew the Karaś knew this. They flew it anyway. Janusz Maciejowski, the man who dropped that first bomb on German soil, survived the Polish campaign. He escaped to Romania with his aircraft. He survived the war and died in 1984, long after the war, a survivor of something that almost nobody survived. Many of his comrades did not. The 21st Squadron suffered devastating losses. The 20 and environment. Pilots were brave. The pilots were skilled. But courage and skill cannot defeat the laws of physics. And the laws of physics said that a 2,000-kilogram aircraft with 720 horsepower engines could not outrun, outmaneuver, or outfight modern fighters armed with cannons and machine guns. But here's the thing. Nobody tells this story anymore. The German invasion of Poland is remembered. The Blitzkrieg is remembered. The Luftwaffe's dominance is remembered. But the first Allied bombing strike on German soil, the Polish pilots who struck back before they were invaded, that is forgotten. Even in Poland, even among aviation historians, the Karaś is overshadowed by the more famous PZL.23 fighter, which was also used in Poland and is slightly more famous because it carried a more prestigious role. The reason is brutal mathematics. Numbers always win historical narratives. Germany won the Polish campaign. The Luftwaffe beat the Polish Air Force. The Wehrmacht conquered the country in 6 weeks. The narrative is one-sided, but history is not just written by the victors. It is also written by those who tell the loudest story, who have the most resources, who get the most attention. The Polish Air Force was small. The campaign was brief. The defeat was total. So, the smaller stories get lost. The Karaś was not a famous aircraft. It was not beloved by its pilots the way the Spitfire was beloved by the RAF, or the Zero was beloved by Japan. It was a stopgap, a desperate measure, built in a nation with no resources, by a government that knew it was doomed to be flown by pilots who knew they would probably die. And yet, on September 2nd, 1939, a Karaś dropped the first bomb on German soil. This matters, not because the bomb was large or destructive. It wasn't. It was a small bomb from a slow aircraft dropped from low altitude at great risk. The damage was minimal. The industrial complex was rebuilt. The war continued regardless. But the act itself matters. It was an act of defiance. In the second half of 1939, when everything was falling apart, when the future was already written and Poland was already lost, a pilot named Janusz Maciejowski flew into the morning darkness in a slow, underpowered, outdated aircraft, and he struck back. He knew he was not going to save Poland. He knew he was probably not going to survive the war, but he went anyway. That is what the Karaś represents. Not military victory, not technological superiority. Defiance, resistance, the refusal to simply accept the inevitable. The Karaś itself is gone now. All of them. Every single aircraft has been destroyed, scrapped, or allowed to decay into rust and dust. But the story remains, and the story says something about human nature, that we do not always surrender when we are beaten, that we do not always accept the inevitable, and that sometimes the smallest, slowest, most forgotten aircraft is the one that records the first moment of resistance. When you think about the Second World War, when you think about the opening days of the European conflict, the image that comes to mind is usually a German Stuka diving on a Polish airfield, or a panzer tank rolling across the plains, or a city burning. These are the images we remember. But there is another image, just as real, just as important. A Polish Karaś climbing toward the dawn, toward German territory, toward a factory that will be bombed by an aircraft that should not have survived the night. This aircraft exists in almost no museum. Almost no documentary covers it. Almost no historian devotes more than a paragraph to it. But it did something first. It was first to strike. And in a war that would last 6 years and consume the better part of a continent, being first to strike, being first to say, "We will not go quietly," matters more than any late war superweapon or any strategic victory. The Karaś was forgotten almost as soon as it ceased to fly. But it should not be forgotten. It represents the moment when Poland, invaded and outnumbered, decided to fight back anyway. It represents every small nation that stood against a larger enemy knowing they would lose, fighting anyway. That's the story of the PZL.23 Karaś, a forgotten aircraft from a forgotten campaign, carrying a story that deserves to be remembered. So here's the question I want to leave you with. How many other forgotten moments from the Second World War are there, waiting to be rediscovered? How many acts of resistance, how many moments of defiance have been lost to time simply because the nations involved were defeated? How many aircraft, how many pilots, how many stories are out there waiting for someone to remember them? The answer is too many. But you can help change that. Leave a comment below telling me what forgotten WW2 story do you want to hear next? What obscure aircraft? What overlooked battle? What small nation's resistance would you like to see covered? And if you love the story of Polish aviation defiance, hit subscribe. Next time, we are flying to Romania with the Karaś pilots who escaped. We will see how Polish aircraft fought on under Romanian colors, flying missions against the Soviets, continuing a war that Poland had already lost. It's a chain of resistance that most people don't even know existed. Thanks for watching.